Hello and welcome to the Paranormal TV podcast, the podcast that asks the question, does Bigfoot have a middle name? If so, what is it? Big Louise Foot?
Big mouth foot.
Big Mouth Foot?
Big gob. I just think it's something else. Big gob foot.
You think it's another part of his body?
Big Stuart foot. Just something dead bog standard.
Yeah, this is what I was thinking, but I was having a conversation literally a few weeks ago. So when obviously we did Made in Dagenham, the musical, a few weeks ago, and to drum up a little bit of interest on social media, we did this video where we asked the cast if they could guess the leading lady's middle name, and two of the people guessed Louise and it ended up being wrong. But the reason they gave for that was because Louise, especially for girls born in the early 90s, is like a really popular middle name.
Yeah, it's mine.
Is it?
Yeah. It's my middle name. Because everyone who was born in the 90s has that middle name.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yep.
Me included.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, me included has that very unique, special middle name.
Do you know something? I always thought your middle name was Zara.
No, that was my stage name.
Yeah, I remember.
For a short period. I know you would think it, wouldn't you? They would think it, but no. It was
because I think just because quite often people take their middle names, don't they, to be stage names. I've just realised as well. This is not going to be good podcasting for the listeners. You're really low down. Here's some admin for people. We record via FaceTime through. I'm on my iPad. FaceTime is how we talk to each other. I have my phone here with my notes written on, and then I have my MacBook that is recording my audio. And for some reason today, my iPad just seems really low down on the table, and I'm just looking really down at you, and it's really disconcerting. But we move.
We move.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I don't know why I stuttered over that. Yeah, I'm really good, thank you.
Good. No concerns, worries. You like to share.
No concerns, no worries. This isn't some kind of therapy couch.
Well, you know.
We are doing a first this week. This will be the first time. I don't know if we'll end up doing it again, but because of the nature of the way this show is presented, it's presented as a 4-part sort of docu-series, isn't it? So we are going to split this into a 2-parter. So this is part 1, and then part 2 will be available next week. Chloe, do you want to let people know what we're looking into?
So we have been watching a program called Paranormal, which is available on BBC. And this series, there's actually a few. I really enjoy them because they're sort of historical paranormal things they look into. So one series looked into aliens, another looked into like monks. This one looks into a lady called Helen Duncan, who was the last female woman to be prosecuted for being a witch in Britain. I'm not sure if she's the last person ever to be prosecuted, but she definitely was in Britain. And she went to prison for 9 months because she could summon dead spirits into the room. She was finally convicted in 1944 because during the Second World War, she claimed that a dead sailor came to her in a seance. He appeared and told her that his ship, which was the HMS Barnum, had sank, which was true. And the military freaked out because obviously they were like, how do you know this? Because it was meant to be kept top secret for obviously multiple reasons, probably so that the enemy didn't find out or so that loved ones weren't aware of what had happened at the time. But she obviously found out through a seance. So she got brought to court about this because they were worrying if she was a spy or if she knew too much intel. But yes, it was an interesting watch, and it is an interesting piece of history really because, well, we'll get into it because I can't give too much away now.
Yeah. So this obviously, as you said, is part of a docu-series that's presented by a lady called Sian, whose surname evades me, and I didn't write it down, and I feel really bad.
I didn't write it down because I just.
But yeah, she a sensational journalist who has more confidence than I have because she literally just goes up to people's houses and she's like, knocks on the door. Tell me what you know about this person. Oh, and by the way, here's a camera in your face.
I know. They literally she has no chill. And you know what? That's how you get good information.
Yeah. My very, very first note, and this isn't really anything to do with the any evidence or anything, but I just love the fact that Emma from Real Life Ghost Stories is featured within the first minute. Because there's a podcast I listen to called Real Life Ghost Stories.
Yeah.
And it's an Irish girl called Emma who presents it. And she has a TikTok page, which is also a really big, huge TikTok page where she shares paranormal stuff. And within the first, I think, minute and a half of the episode, Sean is just like flicking through TikTok and watching a video about Helen Duncan presented by Emma from Real Life Ghost Stories. I was buzzed.
It's cool, isn't it? Because it's giving people the chance to sort of appear on these sort of programs, which a lot of people watch. But it was... Yeah. So I read to mention that she's in Scotland. So Helen Duncan was Scottish. It took place in Scotland.
Yes.
As well. That was quite an important factor there.
Did you not mention that?
I forgot to say that it was in Scotland.
Yeah. So we've mentioned so many countries so far, except Scotland.
Yeah.
Like Sean, she's Welsh.
Yeah.
Emma from Real Life Ghost Stories from Ireland. Oh, and by the way, this entire story takes place in Scotland.
Yeah, just so you're aware, it's in Scotland. It was just an interesting one. I mean, the way she started this was we went and spoke to a few people, like Sean just said. She was knocking on doors, being like, tell me what you know. And what I loved was that she was called Hellish Nell.
Hellish Nell.
Hellish Nell.
And there was one point where one woman said something about good riddance to her is what I say. And I was like, oh, God.
Well, apparently as a child, she was weird. That's what they were talking about. And there was a guy that they spoke about who she kept telling him when she was a little girl, don't go near the lock. And they all thought she was weird. As a child, they just labelled her as the weirdo. Which, to be quite honest, if someone's telling you to stay away from something with no context, you're going to think, okay. But anyway, she kept telling this guy, stay away from the lock. And he was just like, goodbye. I'm driving that way. I can't not go that way.
Yeah, it was the doctor, wasn't it?
Yeah, but that night he died in the lock.
Yeah.
Which was the first time that people started to fear her as a child.
Yeah, she was, 9 years old?
Yeah.
But she apparently predicted a doctor drowning.
Yeah.
She told him not to go, but he did. He drove his car into the water. I did also write, how do we know this fact? Because
yes, Dr. Todd, his name was.
Surely we only have Helen's word and she was 9.
Yeah.
Because unless somebody else was privy to the conversation, but they didn't mention that, maybe her parents were there. The only 2 people that would have known that conversation happened were her and the doctor who died.
Yeah.
So how do we know that that was a real conversation that happened?
It's with history, it's hard because it's just one of these things that, as you know, talk about the Great Fire of London. It's just something that's been told and told and told and told and told, isn't it? So
yeah,
it is with everything with history. He's probably told someone, "Oh, you'll never guess what that weirdo said," and then it just went bam, 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 because people in the town knew that she'd said this because there were people that spoke about it in the program that knew of her as a child and mentioned it a couple of times throughout the episode.
But didn't the crash happen immediately after she told him?
Learn later in the evening.
Okay, I thought it was the way it was presented. I thought she said, as a child, she basically said to him, "Please don't go," and he said, "I've got to go," and then he got in his car, drove off, and crashed and died.
They said on the episode it was in the day she was walking in the town and she crossed him, and then it was in the evening that night because it was a misty night, is what they said.
So there is every chance he mentioned it to somebody else and said, "Oh, because
there was
Helen
a time
Duncan
frame.
said this to me."
Yeah. Because that was just the first thing I went, oh, okay.
Okay, but I did also write on that, because I always have a little paragraph whenever it comes to things like this. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. She claims she told him not to go in the car. Let's imagine this is true. Maybe she had a dream. What if, after hearing this, the doctor just had a lapse in concentration on a treacherous corner of the road, and rather than his death being written in the stars, it was actually just a tragic accident caused by the premonition itself? If she'd said to him, "Please don't go in the car, because there's a lock, and if you crash into it, you'll die." And then he's driving along and he's like, "Oh, here's that lock. Oh God, like that little girl said that thing to me. Oh, that's creepy." Loses concentration, skids out, ends up in the lock.
Well, yeah, there's every
I
chance
think
of that.
is a possibility.
But it's just because she mentioned it and then he died. His car was found in the lock, and it was a very tragic accident. But obviously, when I think I need to give a bit more context into what she did, because before we talk about everything else in the episode, I think we need to sort of go into her seances, because they are a massive part of this whole thing.
They are like the main thing, to be fair.
Yeah. So that was the reason why she became known and famous, was because of her ability to raise the dead.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't just go into a trance and voices would come out. Witnesses have seen their loved ones come back in front of them. This is what claimed to happen. And she was in a room with a curtain, and then she'd come out of the curtain and she'd have a red light.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm still yet to know what the red light was part of. I think maybe it was for ambiance, I don't know. And then there are pictures, which if you go to our TikTok, you probably see a video on. Out of her mouth looks like a white cheesecloth. Now, so I think I need to touch on this now, actually, which is going into episode 2.
This is quick.
Because we're going to have to go back to episode 1, because there's things at episode 2 that we need to talk about for it to make sense.
Yeah.
So, just so you know, I'm going to Harry Price, the psych researcher.
Yeah.
So, this thing with the cheesecloth. Harry Price was a madman. That's all I'm going to say, madman. And
he was a fucking sexual predator.
Literally.
Is what he was.
Awful.
Yeah.
And he, got in touch with Helen, and he asked to do some testing, because he told her that there was an ectoplasm which could be seen if he did scans, which was a form of light-coloured substance in the body that came out of mediums, apparently. It was intrusive testing on Helen, and he took pictures of her, not nude pictures, after he'd done the intrusive testing, which did not need to be done in areas that, for me, not sure what that has to do with being a medium. But he took a picture of her with the cheesecloth in her mouth, and in his report, he said that it appeared out of her. And I did think, because Sean brought it up, was it like that, or did he place it and take the picture?
Yes, because that was brought up by she went to that school, didn't she? The college for psychics, and the guy there was very pro Helen and very anti Harry.
Yeah.
He said that those photos were staged, not for Helen's benefit, but for Harry Price's benefit, and for his psychical research and stuff. So I don't know on that. I don't know who to believe on that. Whether to believe him and believe that they were staged by Harry. I believe that they were staged. I just don't know whether to believe, because again, there's no proof either way. Because both of them are dead, so we have no one to.
No, that's the problem with this. The only thing was, there was the quote from not Harry, but someone who also worked there, that said on the entrance to her search there was no cheesecloth present prior to the seance, which was the only thing that.
So basically, not to go into too much detail, Harry Price essentially conducted a cavity search on Helen to basically try and see if he could find the cheesecloth anywhere within or on her body, anywhere that he could. He decided, right, yep, I can't find any. Then she got behind a curtain, and then they pulled the curtain back, and then this ectoplasm / cheesecloth was coming out of her mouth. The idea was the conclusion that Harry Price had come to was that she had swallowed the cheesecloth and then was regurgitating it, which does, as much as I don't want to agree with the guy because I think he's a I do think that is probably the most plausible thing, is that because people can and do regurgitate things. They can swallow them and then they have like a ridiculous gag reflex that means
it must be horrendous to regurgitate cheesecloth though.
Yeah, it's so literally making me gip as I sit here now.
It's literally thick. To me, it's just bizarre. Absolutely
but they did mention
bizarre.
it does fold down quite. Oh
yes.
my God, it's making me literally feel.
Don't throw up, please. Let's not talk about the cheesecloth anymore.
I have a dreadful gag reflex. I don't even like it when t-shirts are like tight around my neck.
Yeah. So there's the gag.
There's the gag.
There's the cheesecloth conversation. So anyway, away from that, the cheesecloth would appear during her seances, basically out of her mouth.
Essentially.
So Harry Price conducted this experiment. He had no real feedback on it apart from what obviously you've just said about it, which it just seemed a very bizarre and almost sickening experiment, I think you can call it. I'm not even calling it a testing. I think he had it as like an experiment, and he a very sick man actually. But unfortunately,
I think he was just acting way above his station. I thought he was someone more important than he was.
Yeah.
Because I've heard of Harry Price. I've listened to paranormal podcasts and seen paranormal documentaries loads of times. I've heard his name. His name crops up a lot. I think he had something to do with the Enfield haunting.
Yes, he did.
And the Battersea poltergeist. I've heard his name a lot, and I've never heard this side of him, and it just made me so angry.
No, it was. Well, the thing is, a lot of these in this time though, like nowadays, you couldn't just decide you were going to do that. It would have to go through multiple panels and health and safety. But back in the 1940s and 30s, people just wanted their name out there because not many investigations or discoveries had been made, and people were just so obsessed with being like, I'm the first person to discover this, that they go to any length, which is unfortunate.
And it does now make me wonder, and this is dreadful to think, and obviously a horrible accusation if it's not true. But just talking of the Enfield haunting, if he did that to Helen, what did he do to those like teenage girls?
I know.
Anyway, let's move on because this is a horrible conversation.
Yeah. But so the other thing I just want to add for context before we go into Helen, there was reports that during one of her seances, she actually spoke in German and in another form of Spanish, which is known as Gibraltaran. Can't say it. Gibraltaran. I can't speak. Gibraltaran. Spanish. You can edit all the bad versions of Gibraltar.
No, I'm not even going to.
Gibraltaran, Spanish. Again, that was something that was witnessed, and that what is argued there is how can you fake a whole load of languages, because she wasn't someone known, and especially from when we talk about her granddaughters, to be somebody who was able to speak fluently other languages, and especially this form of Spanish, which apparently is quite rarely spoken as well.
It's only really people from Gibraltar that would speak it. I did write down, speaking in different languages, is it unlikely that Helen was multilingual? Yes. Is it impossible? No. That could have been a trait that she hid from everyone except her husband, because I know as well, I made a big note on her husband, Henry. He was the one that basically forced her into it as a money-making scheme. He basically said to her, I think you've got a gift, so let's monetize it and let's push you out there. So there's a thing that people have, and I cannot think of the name of it. Roy Hodgson has it, who's an English football manager, where you can basically pick up languages really easily, and he's fluent in about 12 different languages. Roy Hodgson, the ex-England manager, he's managed football teams all around the world because he can speak in all these different languages.
It's mad skills.
Is it possible that she maybe had that and could just pick up German really easily, and even Gibraltar Spanish?
Yeah, because
it's not impossible.
What was, what I liked is, because we like evidence here, is Sian did actually go through some old recordings, and she actually was able to listen to one of her seances.
Yeah.
And it was quite disturbing, actually. I mean, the program was quite eerie, and they obviously had music and stuff, but it was making me feel a bit, because the voice that was there, I was thinking, it's going to be her, it's going to sound like her, but it did not sound like her at all. And I know you would come here and say, well, you don't know that someone was not there recording and saying, but and speaking as well. But I thought, if that's actually coming from somebody else and all these people are watching it, that is weird and freaked me out. Because, obviously we can't see it, we can only hear it.
Yeah. I don't believe that there's another person there.
No.
What I do believe, though, is that I think Helen could have created that sound herself. And I know you're going to say that's absolutely ludicrous, because the voice does sound really different. But have you watched The Exorcist?
Yeah.
The movie The Exorcist?
Yeah. I've also watched it on stage.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. Big fan.
The voice actor for the demon, for when the child's demon voice is coming out, was a woman.
Yeah.
And there were no special effects. I don't think they generally tended to use voice effects back then for things. They used to just say, you have to either be able to do the voice or you don't. And that was a woman, and that was always in the back of my mind when I was listening to these recordings. And I was like,
remember, she has a cheesecloth in her mouth.
Well, she swallowed it. So
it hangs out though.
No, it wouldn't. If she's, I don't want to talk about this again, Chloe.
No.
If she swallowed it, it would be in her gullet.
No, when she does her seances, the cheesecloth would reappear
as in the cloth. The cloth has already appeared.
Yeah, so that's when she starts her seances. It's like that. So she can't physically move because she goes into a trance. That's the whole point of her seances. Yeah, and she doesn't speak. The voices don't come from her.
Yeah.
So this is why when I was listening to it, she's not doing that, because she's obviously, it's like she's being gagged with just a cloth anyway.
You make a valid point.
That's the point. That's why when I was listening to it, I was like, if she's not doing it, and there's 25 witnesses that are people that have come back because they want to see their loved ones, and they've seen it before, then who else could have done it? And it was eerie, because the voice said uncle, and he said yes, and then somebody who was watching the seance said, I can't see him ill like this. Which was, I was like, oh.
The weirdest thing for me is when the spirit said, can you see me? And everybody in the audience said yes.
Can you all see me?
Because even when you think about Helen having the cloth in her mouth, and maybe Helen couldn't have done the voice. Maybe Henry could have done it. Yeah. That's I know I've gone backtracking on what I said before, which is that I don't believe there was someone else there. But now that you've said that it absolutely could not have been Helen, which I hold my hands up to, because she would have had this cheesecloth hanging out of her mouth by this point. Henry was clearly in on the money-making scheme. So if I'm not coming down to a conclusion yet, because that'll be the end of part 2, if it is a hoax and it's not real, then that would be the conclusion, would be Henry did it because
Yeah.
he's in on it.
Because Sian goes herself to a seance to try and experience it. And I'll be honest, I even was like, these people are having her on. And so
it was I felt a little bit embarrassed for them actually, because they're like, she was doing this whole, bless her, that girl, the medium, she was like, it's a grandfather figure, and I'm like, don't say the most obvious thing when you're trying to talk to someone, like talk to a spirit for someone. Don't bring up a person that will have obviously probably passed, i.e. a grandparent or a great uncle or a great grandparent or something. You know, everyone knows someone who has sadly passed in an untimely fashion, you know, a loved one. Try and pull them through to, you know, make it less obvious.
Yeah. Because I should have wrote the name down. There's a specific name that the Welsh use for like grandparent, and she said, I never called him granddad.
I think it was Tide.
That's it, Tide. And she said, I called him Tide, so if anything would have come through, it'd have been that. But what she said was quite interesting, because obviously she was like, that's not my granddad they're talking about. But she said, during Helen's seances, people claimed to physically see their loved ones. And she said, today in the seance, I know that wasn't my grandfather who she was talking about, but how could someone sit there in a seance with Helen and say that they physically saw their loved one if it wasn't them? Because she said you would know if it wasn't your loved one or if it was somebody dressed up. She said I would know straight away, and so would they. You know, she said it's all well and good someone describing them, but these people physically could see these spirits in front of their eyes. Which it honestly, it's anotherworldly. Even I'm like, it was blowing my mind watching this, thinking, what?
The thing that I keep getting hung up on is when they see the person. Do I think everything else in those seances could be done? Yes, I do, and here's why. And I've written, there was a quote in the show, and I can't remember who it was that said it, but they said, there are people that would swear on their life that Helen could communicate with the dead.
I think that was Graham Hewitt.
Okay, that person. In my response to that is, I'm sure there are people who would swear on their life that Derren Brown could communicate with the dead. But not only does he admit that what he does is all fake, he shows people exactly how he does it.
Yeah.
I do know that Derren Brown can put people into a state of hypnosis. And he can do it en masse. He can do it on multiple people. Could it possibly be that Helen was just a very, very successful mentalist and hypnotist, where she would bring people into a room, put them all under, and whilst performing these seances and having this voice come out, get everyone in the room to hallucinate a spirit? I don't know if that is possible. I don't know if...
I get your point, but remember, she's the one in the trance.
But is she?
Well,
is she really in a trance?
People taking pictures, but that's all we know. She looks like she is.
I looked at one of those photos and I was like, that looks as if my Auntie Irene, rest her soul, had fallen asleep at one of our Christmas parties and someone had taken a picture of her. She looked not too dissimilar to her.
Remember, throughout this whole thing, is this woman was prosecuted for witchcraft.
Yeah.
So, because anyone would love to say, I can bring back the dead, but people go, shut up. No, you can't. You know, no, not to that extent. So, whatever she did and whatever she was doing was not humane. That's all I have to say on that. But you brought up Graham Hewitt.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to go on to that now, because I think the context is there, but the court case.
Yeah.
So obviously she was then summoned to court, but that's when you were saying about the witnesses, and there were 44 called witnesses,
Mm-hmm.
And out of the 44, 40 testified under oath that she raised a family member from the dead in front of their eyes. Now, these weren't just random people. They were very specific that these were people who worked in doctors. They were trustable people, shall we say. Some of them were police. Some of them were lawyers. They were in jobs where part of their sort of professional work is to be honest and give conclusion.
Like they could be scrutinized if it came back on them. Yeah.
They were very specific in the people, and also they were people that had never been to her seances before, had never experienced them. So the way in which they conducted the evidence, I found that quite interesting, because I thought, maybe they've just gone and said, right, can we just have some witnesses to what's happened? But you can see that there was probably genuine fear of what this woman was doing. I mean, what would it be like today if somebody was doing that in the attic?
Well, people do that today. Like I said, this is something I've seen, something very similar to this. Not in the way that I haven't seen him bring a person physically back from the dead, but this, the trick of going behind the curtain, and bringing a spirit through. I've watched that live on stage when I saw Darren Brown. He still does that, but he performs it as an act and as a piece of entertainment, rather than I am bringing your dead ones forward. Yeah. But there are still people today that still do that. Mediums,
but nobody
are doing exactly the same.
Nobody to this day has brought a physical spirit into a room that people can see.
Yeah, but I
That's
still question whether she did. I don't know if I can allow myself to believe that. There's no video evidence. There's no photo. They've got photographs of her with the quote unquote ectoplasm coming out of her mouth. Why couldn't they have brought up a photograph of these spirits standing in the room?
But I suppose, what can you capture? Like when we review haunted house investigations, you can't catch something on camera, can you? And especially in the 1940s, the cameras were not great. So, but like, I agree with you. We only know all this because of the information and the evidence that's still provided today. I mean, the only people that were vocal about what happened and were there were her granddaughters, who still to this day are trying to clear her name. Actually.
Yeah, but you would though, for your family member, you would try and clear their name. Yeah, I do think I think personally she was unlawfully arrested because they said she was a fraud or whatever it was that she said. They said we've still got to get through episode 3 and 4 yet to know the full outcome.
Yeah, I mean,
and everything else that happens. But
what I've picked up on from now is that they were more concerned about how she found out about the warship.
See, that I don't know anything about that yet, because that wasn't mentioned in episode 1 or 2. I only know what you sort of mentioned at the start of this episode, so I've still got yet to watch that.
Yeah, because I've not seen that yet. I just know that because of just research and knowledge, because I'm interested to see where it goes.
See, if I'm making a prediction now, my assumption would be the reason she was arrested then, off the back of that, especially with this being during World War II, it could be a war crime. They could have, on a technicality, they could have arrested her on potentially something even like treason. But again, I don't know yet, because we're not there yet. But
I mean, I was wondering whether it would say witchcraft when she gets prosecuted, whether it would say witchcraft, and because at the minute all I know is that she went down for witchcraft and wizardry, for witchcraft. So you don't know, do you? So I'm intrigued to know what happens, because I mean, the granddaughters were both. I mean, you can say anybody does anything for a bit of telly time, but they were both very like, no, she wasn't a fraud. This happened, but I also thought, how old were you when this was happening? Were you born? Because
they were born because she, one of the sisters, definitely talked about having sat on her grandmother's knee, and having memories of that. But I mean, my granddad died when I was 12, and I have got lots of memories of him.
Yeah.
But there are still lots of things about his life that I couldn't tell you. And I was a teenager when he died. I know he was a builder. I don't know. He loved his family and everything. He loved swimming.
Yeah.
But outside of that, he did some work for charity and stuff. But I wouldn't be able to remember a time when I was a 5-year-old and I sat on his knee and he saw a spirit, and describe in detail everything that happened. So I do take everything that is said from the granddaughters with a pinch of salt, because I don't think they're doing it just to get some TV time. I think they're doing it to clear the name of a relative that they clearly loved very dearly.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's horrible knowing that in your family there is someone who will just be infamously known as a witch, because sadly that is what she was labelled. And it in a way, watching this, although it's a paranormal investigation, my heart almost breaks for her a bit, because as a person so far, what I've grasped is she was trying to do something good for people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether people view it as witch, I know the church are very, very strict on this, and they spoke on the programme about how they were concerned because a lot of people after the war were doing seances to connect with loved ones that had died in the trenches.
That's the thing, is it was a very stressful time, and people wanted to reconnect with their loved ones that they lost in a very untimely manner.
Yeah, so in Helen's defence, she probably thought, I'm doing something good here. I'm trying to give people a chance to connect with loved ones that they may never see again. But this is why I'm intrigued for episode 3 and 4. Because I just wonder if something else is going to come up that ties her more to witchcraft.
Yeah, or is it just that they're going to get her out on a technicality? Because you've seen it, because I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts as well, and sometimes to get an arrest, you have to get people on a technicality before you can properly try them and convict them. So is it that there is an existing crime that still exists from, how like you have these weird things that still exist as crimes, like it's illegal to take your sheep on a walk over a canal bridge past 8 p.m. in Dorset or something like that.
Yeah,
these ridiculous old crimes that still exist, and so you catch people on a technicality. I don't know if it's maybe something to do with that rather than her actually being a witch, or maybe they actually just get her on war crime or treason or something. If with what is inevitably going to go on. I'm just intrigued to happen.
I'll be honest, since watching this, I've had to refrain from Googling more things about her because I can't know anything else, because I'm trying to hold off. But I am so intrigued by it. After this, I feel like I'm going to have a look into it more, because, like, damn, somebody was arrested, like, less than 100 years ago for witchcraft in the UK. Mm-hmm. Mental times. Nobody talks about it. It's ridiculous. I didn't know this was a thing. I honestly didn't even know that this had happened. And I think we talk so much about the war, and obviously the war, very, 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 touchy thing, and it's a respectful thing. But amongst all that, a woman got arrested for witchcraft. But if that hadn't happened during a war, I think it would still be spoke about a lot today.
Yeah.
Because it's bizarre. It is bizarre. Because, I love The Crucible, Arthur Miller's play, fabulous. And look at that. And it's an actual representation of how people treated people who they thought were witches. They hung them, they burnt them, but then she gets arrested for 9 months.
Yeah.
It's a witchcraft is a topic. That's all I'm going to say. I think it's
Yeah, I do think I'll probably go more into this on the next episode as a kind of roundup. But generally speaking, this isn't to say that this isn't me saying that Helen's story isn't paranormal, because like I said, I'm not coming down on a conclusion on that just yet. But I do not believe that witches are real.
No.
I do not believe witches have ever existed. I believe that there was a time in history when men were the rulers, and they were the strongest, they were the bravest, they were the most intellectual. Not really, but that is how they perceived themselves. So in and around the sort of 1700s, when this sort of witch trials happened, women started showing more intellectual behavior, maybe some more physical brawn, and showed themselves to be equal to the men, something that the men had never seen before and something that the men felt uncomfortable with. And so how do you, as a man who doesn't recognize that, how do you deal with that? You call her a witch, burn her at the stake.
Yeah.
That's what I think happened. I think women were just showcasing a level of intellect and probably physical brawn that the men were just not accustomed to, and they got spooked and didn't, and lashed out. And I think that's where the entire idea of a witch came from, and that's why all of the witch trials happened. That's not to say that Helen's story isn't real. Like I said, I'll leave my conclusion till part 2.
My thing, because witchcraft still happens today. Not in the same respect of raising the dead, but there's people that believe they can heal people, and
like Reiki and stuff.
Yes, and is it pagan?
Paganism.
Yeah, which is a form of they say is like witchcraft. It's not labelled as like witchcraft, but it's related to. And if you really want to get into the dark side, people still believe in voodooism and creating things like that, which is dark. That is a dark side, which I do think some probably cults are still practicing today. But I don't know anyone that is into witchcraft or takes part in any of them things. I hope. I don't know anyone that takes part in voodooism.
I don't know that I know of.
That's to say, you wouldn't know. That's the thing. I don't think you'd know. But this is the topic, and it's interesting. I mean, I think I'd like to talk about it on part 2 a bit more about the current day today witchcraft in this century.
When it comes to like Reiki healing and stuff like that, and like alternative medicines and stuff, I've always been very skeptical about that as well. I believe obviously like placebos are a big thing.
Yes.
They are, they are proven, where people have been given a pill with literally nothing in the capsule, been told to swallow it, and it's been known to work. So is it possible that I think if and when Reiki works, if it works, I don't know if it does, I've never had it, I've never really given it a go, if I'm honest with you. I think if it works, I think that's entirely placebo, and entirely just a person believing that they can heal from whatever is happening. And when it comes to like alternative medicine, like there's a really great quote from Tim Minchin, who I love.
I love Tim Minchin.
So
he's releasing a new album. Shout
massive. I'm a huge fan of Tim Minchin, and I love his comedy, his songs, and he wrote a 9-minute beat poem called Storm, and in that poem he says the phrase, alternative medicines have either not been proved to work or been proven not to work. Do you know what they call alternative medicines that have been proven to work? Medicine. And I loved that quote, and I just that's kind of my stance on all of that kind of witchcraft, Reiki, kind of.
Yeah.
I know it sounds really. It's probably going to be really offensive to kind of shoehorn it into one little keyhole, but kind of hippie stuff. I'm a man of science, as you know, and I will always trust the NHS. If I'm ill, I go to a doctor. The doctor prescribes me some medicine, and it gets me better. I'm not going to go to a Reiki healer and say, "Can you please wave your hands over me and make me better?" I just don't believe that. Yeah, that's where I am on the whole witchcraft thing.
What I found quite interesting, though, which is why it stands out to me as to why they did this trial. I just was curious as to when the last trial was in America, because obviously we know it was very big in Salem.
The Salem witch trials.
It was 1878. Now, I was expecting it to have gone on to the 1900s, but it wasn't. It was the 14th of May, 1878, and it was Lucretia Brown. And that was the last witchcraft trial in the world until Helen Duncan. So that's why it just completely blows my mind.
Yeah.
It just
do you know what I find is probably the biggest difference between someone like Lucretia Brown and all of the quote unquote witch trials, the the original ones, is that they were all executed, whereas Helen Duncan wasn't.
No,
she was imprisoned for 9 months. I think unlawfully, but that I think was a huge step towards progression. There are probably still countries that still hold witch trials and still hold accusations for witchcraft and warlockship, or whatever it's called, the sort of male version of a witch. But yeah, I think this was a really intriguing watch. I am excited for episodes 3 and 4.
it sparks questions.
I know loosely what's coming, and I could make a huge U-turn on where I currently stand on the paranormal aspect of it, but that does remain to be seen.
Yeah.
You can watch Paranormal: Britain's Last Witch on BBC iPlayer if you're in the UK. I don't know if that's available worldwide. I apologise. This might be one that overseas countries might have to miss. But do let us know your thoughts. Let us know your opinions. Do you agree with us? Do you agree with me? Do you agree with Chloe? Are you hashtag Team Sean or hashtag Team Chloe? Do you believe? Are you a skeptic? Let us know, paranormaltvpod@gmail.com. You can also send your own paranormal stories there. Let us know your opinions on the podcast itself. If you're enjoying the podcast, leave us a 5-star review. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it means the absolute world to us, and it means that we can go up the charts and more people can discover us. You can also find us on social media at paratvpod. That's on TikTok and on Instagram. By the time this episode goes out, there will be a video, a very well put together video, I must say, by Chloe on Helen Duncan. Let us know your thoughts on there as well. Comments are always greatly appreciated, and follows and likes and shares and everything. And thanks for joining us for our very first ever part 1 of an episode. It feels quite weird coming out of this episode because it's something we're not used to.
We're not allowed to have a conclusion.
We're not allowed to have a conclusion just yet, and it feels odd. I feel like I'm suppressing something. So we'll leave it there for today.
Yeah. But thank you for joining us this week. Hope you've enjoyed our part 1 on the Helen Duncan witchcraft trial. But all I have to say is to be continued. Good night.